For decades, two of the world's most powerful nations, the United States and Russia, have been locked in a complex relationship marked by rivalry, mistrust, and moments of uneasy cooperation. But why? How did two nations that once fought side by side in World War II become bitter adversaries? What led to the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and the tensions that still exist today? This is the story of how the U.S. and Russia became rivals and why they still don't trust each other. To understand the animosity between the United States and Russia, we have to go back more than a century. In the 19th century, the two nations had little interaction, and surprisingly, they even cooperated. In 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska from the Russian Empire, an act of diplomacy rather than hostility. But things changed after the Russian Revolution in 1917. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the Russian monarchy and established a communist government. The U.S., along with Britain and other allies, even sent troops to Russia to support anti-communist forces. This was the first sign of ideological conflict, capitalism versus communism. And though the two nations would later unite against a common enemy, the seeds of distrust had already been planted. Fast forward to the 1940s, Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, was threatening to take over Europe. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, had initially signed a non-aggression pact with Germany, but when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin had no choice but to join the fight against the Nazis. This led to an unlikely alliance between the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Despite deep ideological differences, they worked together to defeat Hitler. The Soviets suffered immense losses, over 27 million people, including civilians and soldiers. The U.S., while also facing casualties, played a crucial role in supplying weapons and resources through programs like the Lend-Lease Act. But even as they fought together, tensions were rising. Stalin distrusted the West, believing they delayed opening a second front in Europe to weaken the Soviet Union. And after the war, those tensions exploded into something far more dangerous, the Cold War. The Cold War wasn't a direct military conflict, but it was a battle of ideologies, technology, and influence. The world was divided. On one side, the capitalist US and its allies. On the other, the communist Soviet Union and its satellite states. One of the first major confrontations was the Berlin blockade in 1948, where the Soviets tried to cut off Western access to Berlin. The US responded with the Berlin airlift, supplying food and fuel to West Berliners by air. Then came the arms race. Both nations developed nuclear weapons, leading to a terrifying standoff. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world closer to nuclear war than ever before, as Soviet missiles were placed in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores. The crisis ended peacefully, but the world had changed. The threat of mutual destruction kept both sides on edge for decades. Though the US and Soviet Union never directly fought, they battled through proxy wars around the globe. In Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, both sides supported opposing forces. The U.S. fought against communist expansion in Korea, 1950 to 1953, and Vietnam, 1955 to 1975, suffering heavy losses and deep political divisions at home. Meanwhile, in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, facing fierce resistance from U.S.-backed Afghan fighters known as the Mujahideen. These conflicts drained resources, fueled global instability, and deepened the divide between the superpowers. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was struggling. Economic decline, costly wars, and political unrest weakened its grip. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms, but by 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War ended. For a moment, it seemed like U.S.-Russia relations could improve. But the scars of the Cold War never truly healed. Russia saw NATO's expansion as a threat. The U.S. criticized Russia's human rights issues and political policies, and soon a new wave of tensions would emerge. Since the 2000s, relations between the U.S. and Russia have been anything but friendly. Accusations of election interference, cyber warfare, and economic sanctions have only deepened the divide. One of the biggest turning points came in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. The U.S. and its allies imposed heavy sanctions, while NATO strengthened its military presence near Russian borders. And in 2022, tensions erupted into full-scale war when Russia invaded Ukraine. The U.S. provided billions in aid to Ukraine, while Russia accused the West of encroaching on its sphere of influence. This war has further damaged U.S.-Russia relations, making cooperation seem almost impossible. So, why do the U.S. and Russia still distrust each other? The answer lies in history. Decades of ideological battles, proxy wars, nuclear threats, and political conflicts. While both nations have worked together at times, deep scars remain. Can they ever truly move past their history, or are we doomed to repeat the tensions of the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history and world events. Your support helps us create more content like this.